For the people that don't know me, my name is Tim Dillon. I'm a comedian. I have a podcast, and I have a special that just came out on Netflix called I'm Your Mother, and you should watch it because I believe it is the most important comedy special that has ever been released, and it will change the course of world history. And if you want to be a part of that, I would suggest watching it if you can. The comedy scene has changed a lot in the time that I've been doing it. When I started, nothing or very little was digital, and now almost everything is. So you've seen the comedy scene change like everything in the world has changed, where, now people have the ability to directly go online and connect with an audience without gatekeepers. So that has opened the comedy scene up, and I think it's been a very good thing. I think what's caused the explosion of comedy and podcasts over the last few years is that, again, the distribution model is perfect, right? People are consuming content on their phone. They're consuming it in clips, and whether it's a joke or something that a rant or something on a podcast, people now have the ability to consume this stuff, again, on their phone all day, and it takes up mental residence, and then they become a fan of something without even realizing it. I wouldn't say comedians have a hold over the culture. I think comedy reflects the culture. I don't know if it drives it. I think that's a big misnomer that comedians are driving the culture. I think comedians are reflecting a lot of what's going on out there, and critiquing things that seem absurd, or trying to be funny about things that are inherently tragic or unfair, or I don't know that comedians are responsible for all these things people think they're responsible for.
How much of an impact do you think that comedians had on the last election?
I think the impact comedians had on the last election is overstated, and I said it right after the results came in. I don't think that you can run a terribly unpopular candidate with a platform that people took issue with and get beaten in the way that you got beaten and blame it on Theo Von. I don't think that's fair. I think that really denies any agency that the Democratic Party had in nominating a better candidate or doing a better job communicating their policy or altering their policy to be more in line with where the American people were. Again, I just don't think it's fair to say that it's the result of one or two interviews or four interviews on the internet. I mean, that's, I think, completely insane. And again, it just, it removes any need for that party to be introspective about where they are and where they're going. I think that the party, the Democratic Party, to be a competitive party again, has to moderate some of the positions they have on social issues and get more radical economically. I think that's probably their winning position will be removing a lot of the corporate big money players from their roster and elevating people that have more of a populist economic policy, and then moderate some of the social positions. Still be for freedom and people having autonomy to live the lives they want to live, but I would, the hot button issues like, the biological men in women's sports is a hot button issue. The public's rendered a verdict; they don't want it. Children transitioning, they don't want it. Moderate positions on those issues and adopt more of a populist economic message, and I think they'll be very competitive again if they can do that.
In the weeks leading up to the election, you predicted that there would be a fallout between Trump and the tech bro faction of MAGA. How do you think this relationship between people like Musk and Bezos and Trump is holding up?
It's hard to say how the relationship is holding up between the tech people and Trump. I think there is a collision course that they're on eventually. It's not only me that has pointed that out. There's a lot of elements of the Bannon right that don't like the tech right. There's very different strains of conservatism that they both espouse. As an observer, as somebody who's watched this, I can't imagine that there won't be some falling out at some point when you have a group of people who are, incredibly influential and powerful and well-funded, but they have a lot of beliefs that are way out of the mainstream. Transhumanism is way out of the mainstream. Neuralink is probably way out of the mainstream. A lot of these, belief systems that Silicon Valley has are not reflective of traditional conservative beliefs, and how that all lives together is going to be interesting, right? AI and automation. How do these, if you're talking about the middle class, you're talking about protecting jobs, and you're talking about, limiting immigration, but you also have people saying we need immigrants from certain places because Americans are not competitive in that sphere economically. That seems to be a direct contradiction. When you have people in tech saying that, we need lots of federal money, government grants to compete for AI supremacy. But I think a lot of people would want to see a lot of that money going towards securing the border, or, building up industries in America that have been, deindustrialized. And then the tech people are going to want to take all that money and then put that on the backs of the American taxpayers when these are already some of the wealthiest people in the world. That seems like there's going to be an inevitable conflict there, right? So I don't know. I don't have the inside info on how the relationships are going, but I imagine that there's going to be an inevitable strain between the America First contingent of that movement and the tech first contingent. I think that a lot of people are, very uneasy with the idea of tariffs. Again, I'm not an economist. I think the instinct that you need to make trade more competitive is correct. And I think the recognition that a lot of areas in America have been deindustrialized and the middle class has been, thrown overboard, and all of that I think is correct. The short-term blood in the water from, this market volatility is probably going to make people take a few, less vacations. I don't know. There's a 90-day pause on the tariffs right now. I don't know in what form they come back. I don't know if by that time it's offset with a rate cut or, some tax relief. I don't know how you're going to offset some of that. So I predict a stay-at-home summer. I predict people are going to reconnect with making a s'more in their backyard. And they, no long flights. Who wants to get on a flight anyway? They're all blowing up. The baby boomers are a deeply American generation, kind of a deeply selfish, paranoid, vicious, petty, monstrous group of people who are incredibly funny and are incredibly agile in the sense that they pivot from one political faction to another seamlessly. The only politics that baby boomers have is of the self. I think they'll leave a legacy of McMansions and cars and kind of turning America into a hollow, corporate, suburban hellscape that believes in nothing except consumption. And they'll leave a legacy of instilling fear into most of the life forms they encountered. And I think they'll leave a legacy of, this kind of individualism that has come at the expense of the common good. And but good food, good music. It's a give and take.
On your new special, I'm Your Mother, you talk about how nowadays a lot of people are willing and almost eager to talk about the mental illnesses that they have. Do you think that there's actually a rise in mental illness, or do you think that society has romanticized it to the point where people are almost grasping at a mental illness?
I think there's both things happening. I think, yes, there's more people getting diagnosed with mental illnesses, but I think there are more people that are cynically exploiting the idea of mental illness to justify their own bad behavior. Or there's a lot of people that have become adept at the idea that there's currency in being a victim of something. And so I do think that, you do have people with genuine mental problems. You have people that are on the cusp. You have people that, fight these battles. And my mother was one of them. And I know a lot of people. And I judge none of those people. And I'm sure I'm one of them. I think we're all, to an extent, those people, right? To varying degrees. But I also think there's just a cynical compulsion that certain people have to make it their identity or to use it as a way to excuse their behavior or to win points in a game in which they are trying to position themselves as like an aggrieved, embattled person. I think Gen Z grew up in an internet-based world in which reality was kind of malleable, and I think that they, are expressing that through many different facets of their life. I think that, there's a lot of, really crazy stuff on the internet, and there's a lot of great stuff. And I think when you're young, it's very hard to tell which is which. And I think you're very impressionable. And I think a lot of those kids end up being heavily influenced by some of the crazier corners of the internet, and then they lose their minds. There is a hunger for real art and real thought, and we have filled it with kind of this hyper commercialized garbage for so long that people really can't tell the difference between a piece of art and an ad. And I think you have people that are becoming an advertisement. I think you're looking at a family who has branded themselves as a chain store, and they are singing songs because they like eating the things that people sell you while you are buying other things to eat. So to me, it's a harbinger of the apocalypse. I do believe they are the physical representation of a demonic entity called Baal. I just think they're interdimensional beings that have visited Earth to hasten the pace of its destruction, would be my off-the-dome thought. I don't think Joker 2 failed because of politics. I don't think Joker 2 is a political failure. I think it was a failure in the concept and the execution. I think it's just an old school failure. It's a swing and a miss. I think that Snow White seemed to be a mix because I think a lot of the decisions made were like not having dwarfs in the movie called Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs were, and you have a very outspoken young actress who, if you want to sell a product to a large number of people, you probably have to curtail some of the opinions of the people in it. If you're going to sell Honey Nut Cheerios, the bee is probably not going to come out and talk about Gaza. I don't even know if the bee is wrong, but a lot of people are going to go, we just want the Cheerios. But if the bee starts talking about the Balfour Declaration, people are going to be confused. So I think that's the issue we have.
So I've been hearing you for the last few years talk about the intelligence agencies, the Epstein case. Do you think that we'll ever see the Epstein client list? And if we do, would you even believe it?
I don't think we'll see anything. I just don't. I have a very cynical view of what we're going to find out the truth about. I think really you have to look at politics as entertainment and look after yourself and your family, because while there are things that can be done and changes that happen, I think that, thinking that you're going to find out all the things you want to know is kind of naive. And I feel like I've been around, paying attention for 25 years. And in that time, we've all thought that we were going to find out the answers, and they don't come. You kind of already know. Here's the thing. You kind of already know a lot of the answers. It's just, what do you do with it? But you kind of already know. It's like, if it came out that the CIA was doing something bad, no one would go, whoa! Everyone already knows. You're not going to get from in my estimation, you're not going to get a document saying, yes, and we did it. So you just put together the pieces of the evidence and you know.
Yeah, it was kind of like with the JFK files when they released that. Like, if you've read, Devil's Chessboard, there's a bunch of other books of the CIA, what they've done. Like, it seems like people kind of already knew, and nothing new was really released in these documents, but it did help, I guess.
We know from history that the CIA has done all kinds of things in other countries that include coups and political assassinations, and you would have to believe that they would never do it here. So that's the way you have to organize it in your mind. Like, if you believe that they would never do it here, then you believe they would never do it here. But, for the most part, I think most people would not be shocked to find out that there is, in American politics, a, whatever you want to call it, right? Like a hidden hand. Trump uses the term the deep state. Other people have said it's, the permanent government. There are people that are just there and that are, very powerful and have agendas that are not the agendas of the American people. And I think everyone knows that. I don't think anyone doesn't know that. When did it become a right-wing statement to say, I should have the bodily autonomy to not take an experimental vaccine? When did it become a right-wing statement to say, I don't think the United States should be in wars that are... I remember these were left-wing statements. When did it become a right-wing statement to say that the United States should look after the middle class and workers instead of importing cheap labor so that the profits on Wall Street could go up? These are right-wing points? This is the craziest thing I've ever heard in my life. These are right-wing points to say that the American middle class should have priority in terms of jobs, and we shouldn't allow billionaires to become trillionaires on the backs of foreign labor. Is that are these right-wing statements? Freedom of speech, is that right-wing? None of it feels right-wing to me. I'm against people being deported for criticizing Israel because I think that they have the freedom of speech to do it. By the way, so Ann Coulter came out and said that. She's not left-wing, So I believe in principles. I think politics flips. Democrats become Republicans. Republicans become Democrats. I think you just got to believe in certain things. They might flip again. This could happen again where the Republican Party becomes anti-free speech and the Democratic Party becomes pro-free speech. It could happen again. I don't know. It certainly flipped during the last election cycle where the Democratic Party was the pro-war, kind of anti-speech, seemingly pro-corporate party. But if we go to war with Iran and start deporting people that wrote op-eds critical of Israel, then you'll see the Republican Party is now the pro-war, anti-free speech party. So you actually have to just believe in principles. And you have to hold the people that you've elected to account. You cannot follow the people you've elected. Otherwise, you're just in a personality cult. You're not you're not a free-thinking person. You have to say, I have a belief. The belief is that we shouldn't do this. And if we do that, whoever does it, Kamala, Trump, Bernie, whoever, you have to hold them to account and say, I don't think this is good for America.
Donald Trump obviously ran as the anti-war candidate. One, do you think that he's going to stick to that? And two, if he doesn't stick to it, do you think that you'll see people on the right cover for him and say that, he had to do this or something?
I hope he'll stick to it. I think that is a part of his appeal is that he believed that the American people lost a lot, not only in blood and treasure, but in standing around the world with these wars in Iraq and Afghanistan that ultimately led nowhere. I think Trump understands that the source of American prosperity cannot be the forever war. And I believe he'll stick with it. I think there are a lot of voices in his ear, people that want him to go to war with Iran. And I think that would be a strategic mistake. Will people defend him if he does it? Well, of course. People are going to defend, people that are in the party are going to defend anyone. But I think it's basically the job of you'll lose all credibility if you're if your job is to, you know, have a platform and people listen to you based on what you think, you lose all credibility if you just flip and go, no, it's a great idea to go to war with Iran. So I no matter who does it, it's a bad idea.
So now that you're back in LA, is there anything that would make you want to leave, or do you think you're there for good now?
No, I mean, I have homes in New York and LA. I'm rich, so I can live wherever I want. And I tend to just go, I'm not as rich as I should be, watch the special, but I mean, I can just live where the hell I want. I mean, I love Florida's red state. My red state's Florida. I just grew up at the ocean, what do you want from me? Where people live isn't interesting. Like what people live isn't interesting. What people do for a living isn't interesting. All of this crap that we think is interesting interests nobody. I think what's interesting is people's personalities and their point of view. I've met very liberal people in Texas and very conservative people in California. Now, obviously, there aren't enough right-wing people in California or liberal people in Texas to change the overall dynamic of the state. But you should have a country where people feel differently about things, right? And politics isn't inherently the most interesting thing about people. It really isn't. Rich people have a lot more in common with each other, right or left. Why do you think all these right-wing guys, as soon as the market starts tanking, they're all attacking Trump? All they care about is their money. They don't give a shit about anything else except their money. They're not Republicans or Democrats. They're just really, really wealthy people who care about themselves. And that's going to be the interesting fight.
Yeah.
Are the tech people Republicans? They were Democrats till 5 minutes ago. They were all Democrats. They were censoring Republicans. They were kicking people off the internet. They were trying to impoverish and destroy people's careers. And now they're Democrats who we're all supposed to trust them. I'm sorry, now they're Republicans and they're all supposed to be trusted because, like these guys like Bezos and Zuckerberg were kind of pretty democratic.
Where do you see the country in 10 years?
Oh, I don't know. It's a good question. I don't know. We'll either end up in 10 years, we'll either be in some tech dystopia, which is just completely unrecognizable and strange and creepy, and it probably will have had some major war with China, hopefully not. Or it'll be chill. How nice would that be if it was relaxed and cool and people weren't, and we were just kind of, we've been through this very tumultuous political time, and we all kind of discovered that, the real problems weren't political. They were deeper than that, and they were more, maybe it's aliens, maybe it's climate, maybe it's, I don't know what the hell it is that gets us all on the same page, but it would be nice if people were chill. I imagine that wouldn't be amazing for my career, so a little tumult would be nice.